If you're an e-commerce brand that's failed to launch into the US, you are not getting the results that you're after, in this video, we'll break down the number one reason why US launches fail, and we'll give you a few more reasons that you should be looking at as to why you might not be getting the results that you're after. So why do most US launches fail? We have a lot of visibility over this because we're in Australia. It's quite a limited TAM. So the second you hit about 10 million online, you really need to be looking at expanding into different markets. And the number one selected market for any Australian brand is getting yourself into the US because it solves that TAM issue. We don't want to go and launch in New Zealand and just have the exact same issue over and over again. The number one reason why people fail on a US launch is because their expectations of the performance of their existing ads is wrong. And let me tell you exactly why this ends up being the case. If you look at an ad, and typically if you're at this volume and where you're looking at launching into the US, I would hope that you're doing at least $5 million online plus. At this point, assuming that Meta has driven majority of your results, you probably have between 1, ideally closer to 10 high-performing ads. From that, when you go and take these ads and you translate them and you launch them into the US, in Australia, they might be generating you, or in your primary market, they might be generating you a 10 ROAS. But when you go and launch them into the US, you might get a 2. And you're wondering, why are these underperforming so much? Why is this ad not doing the numbers that it's doing in our primary market? And the reason actually has nothing to do with the ad. It has nothing to do with the landing page, the offer, the nuances of the market. This is something I hear a lot, particularly from agency in rhetoric to try to sell their services, is that they say that, the US is a very, very different market. You need to be working with an agency that understands the market. In fact, you might even want a local agency in the US. People sell this for the UK, UAE. Doesn't matter the region. People are always arguing that there's lots of nuance to the region, which is why you can't succeed. It's really not true for the big 5. Okay, when we look at UK, Australia, US, Canada, etc., all of these regions respond to ads very, very similarly. So what is the difference then? Why is this ad performing at a 10 in Australia but a 2 in the US? It has nothing to do with the nuances. It's to do with the fact that this, quite frankly, isn't a very good ad. And the reason why it isn't a good ad is because these results are being significantly overinflated by your existing brand presence. So many people know about you in your primary market that you can really throw any ad into the account and it's going to do decent because people have heard of you before. And so when people see this ad that is okay, they click, they buy, the attributed ROAS looks really good, but it's not because this is an amazing ad. It's simply because of all the work that you've been doing for the last 6 years in this market. And so then when you go and take an okay ad and you translate it into a region that has no idea who you are, you have no existing brand presence, what ends up happening? Well, it performs like it should as an okay ad. And so the key to a successful US launch is you need creative that is incredibly effective at targeting top of funnel audiences and converting them. The issue is that once you get to this size, most people get away with mediocre ads because that's all they need when they have such a strong existing brand presence in a very small total addressable market. And so that is number one. That's why most people fail in the US. Your ads just aren't as good as you think they are. A really good way to stress test this, okay, you might be thinking about, okay, I'm about to launch into the US in Q2 2026. How do we know whether our ads are going to translate well into the US? How can we have confidence before we go and do this launch? Really, really easy stress test here. Okay, so what you can do, and this is what I recommend everyone does, is launch all of your ads, do all your testing in Q1. And the reason why this is such a great idea is because in Q1, general market sentiment declines. Okay, so people don't want to buy for a myriad of reasons, and we'll have videos coming out on this in Q1. There's obviously post-wallet fatigue, there's obviously seasonality, there's a lack of events that exist within January, the list goes on and on. So there's a lot of reasons as to why Q1 is bad. But because of that, it allows your truly good ads to shine through. In fact, your Q1 performance at an ad level is pretty reflective of what they will do in a new market. And so what you will end up seeing is that this ad in Australia, or whatever your primary market is, in Q1 is going to operate at a 2 ROAS. And you're going to get a real reflection of the performance. And so what that ends up meaning is that whatever you were planning to do in Q1, let's say that you were planning based on your ad spend, I'll give you some ballpark figures. So let's say that you're spending $100K a month through Q1, and you were planning to pair this with 130 new ads a month, my recommendation, bump this up a little bit. Take it 10% higher, 20% higher. Instead, let's actually think about testing 160 ads. And the reason for this is because the actual data that is collected off the ad performance here from you as a creative strategist, as a media buyer, as the owner of the business, it's actually going to be a much more effective period because you can trust the numbers more because there's low sentiment existing within the market. This will then also equip you with more winners. And so when you come out of Q1, not only, let's say, across 3 months of testing, 160 ads a month, you have a relatively okay win rate. Let's say you end up with like 7 really high-performing winners that are generating good results throughout the Q1 period. This is really enough to go into a US launch and get really strong performance, probably get yourself to 100K a month out of the gates. You might even be able to go higher depending on how scalable these particular ads are. Now, comparatively, let's say you did this exact same exercise. Okay, you went and tested 160 or 130 ads a month. You went through this process to try to identify winners. You want to know what to actually go and translate into the US. But the difference is, instead, you do it in Q2. The issue here is now, with the exact same ads, all right, let's say you go and test 160 ads, okay? You're going to get 15 winners, right? And you're going to think all of these 15 ads did well based on your criteria, whether that was an attributed ROAS criteria, whether that was a combination of CPCs, conversion rates, etc. It depends on obviously how you're defining winners. But let's say you have 15 winners. Well, now you're actually decreasing your odds of this US launch being successful because you're going to go and translate a bunch of ads. Half of these ads, over 50% of these ads, actually aren't winners. They actually aren't going to do well. You're actually just going to waste money here. And you're going to have a false perspective on the performance of this US launch. Now, where people end up really failing is that they don't do this much ad volume. They do way less. And so the actual reality of winner volume here is that they don't end up with 7 winners. They end up with like 2. And then they don't do it in Q1. They do it in Q2. And so instead of having 2 potential winners, they end up with like 0 potential winners. Oh, sorry, they end up with what they think is like 8 winners, but only 10% of this is actually winning ads. And so when they go and do a US launch, they go in expecting, okay, this is going to go well. We have like 8 ads that are performing well at the moment. The ROAS here is like a 10. It's going to translate incredibly well into the US market. No, it's not. Okay, you actually only have 2 winners when it's stress tested in an environment that's going to be similar to a new market launch. And the ROAS definitely isn't 10. It's close to about a 3.5 over here. So this is really the primary reason why most people fail when they do a US launch, is because their ads just aren't as good as they think they are. And when you go and put them in a cold audience, you actually realize that. And for context, this isn't like restricted just to e-commerce. This applies to us as well, right? A lot of people probably watching this YouTube video, if you're in Australia, you've probably seen ads from us. If we take our ads and we go and launch them in the US or we go and launch them in the UK, they perform half as well. All right, our cost per qualified book call doubles. And the reason why it doubles has nothing to do with the ad. It's not that the market responds worse to my face in an ad over there or the nuances of that particular market and the value proposition that we should be pushing. No, it's because people know who we are in Australia. Right? People see our ads and they go, oh, those guys, Blue Sense. Yeah, I think I've seen a YouTube video from them before. I might click and actually book a call. Sounds interesting. Whereas in the UK or the US, our ads get served and people go, I have no idea who these guys are. I'm definitely not clicking and finding out more. And so because of that, you end up with very, very different performance across the markets. You get artificial inflation in the primary market where you've built a lot of brand presence. Now, that is not to say that this is the only reason why US launches fail. It is the primary. It is probably your reason right now. I'd say 80% of people watching this is why you fail. But there are a bunch of other reasons, and you don't want to write these off because these are also important. Number one is people neglect CRO, and particularly this is one of those nuances where it actually does become important at a geo level. You want your CRO to be specific to the region. And this doesn't have to be complex. It's nothing crazy. It's just that if you're in the US and you click on the ad, you want the landing page to look like you're a US business. Because I don't want to deal with tariffs. I don't want to deal with extended shipping times. I don't want to deal with confusing returns where I might have to ship it back internationally to Australia. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. And so when I click on an ad and I'm a US citizen, or if I click on an ad and I'm an Australian citizen, right, I want it to be an Australian brand, because it's just going to come with a lot less overhead and headache if I'm not confident in the product. And so that's where you just end up with worse conversion rates, because the only people that do convert are people that are really eager to buy, right? I still buy stuff from the US, but I have to be really eager to want to buy something from there, because I know that I can return it, but it's going to be incredibly annoying. And I also know that it's going to take a while to get overhead. That's number one. Number two is you want to make sure that everything is set up just like the Australian market. So I've seen US launches be like 20% under the performance that they should be, because brand owners have just rushed in and forgotten to even set up abandoned cart flows. Like, make sure your flows are in place. Okay, make sure everything is in place that is working here, because it's the bunch of 1%ers that all compound to create an outcome. Okay, it's like 1,000 BBs rather than one bullet. Okay, it's not just one thing that allows the US launch to be successful. Everything has to be in place perfectly so that you can launch well. Number three, I've seen this as well. It's not as common because it sounds very counterintuitive, but it does happen, which is that the products that you go and push into a new region launch isn't your entire product portfolio. Now, it makes sense, particularly if you're going to hold inventory locally within the US market. Okay, if you're going to use a 3PL, which is obviously very common now, with tariffs being introduced. Now, the issue that then follows is SKU prioritization and size curves. And I can't spell today, so let's just rush this out. SKU prioritization and size curves. So size curves is pretty obvious. You go out of stock in key sizes, and then that causes a performance dip in the other market because you're holding less inventory, so it's easy to just drop out of stock in the new markets that you launch into. But number two is SKU prioritization. So you might have like 5 winning products in your primary market, right? And then you, due to cash flow or whatever kind of constraints, you go and actually only launch 1 or 2 into the US. And you see significant subpar performance. And it's because you're missing core winning products that work in the Australian market. And it might actually be the case that some of these products don't work as well in that particular market because there might be more competitors. Or if you have some kind of unique positioned product that is manufactured by you that exists in the US market, it's obviously not going to perform as well. This is actually a very, very common, incredible strategy for starting an e-commerce business that I've seen quite a lot of people have a lot of success with, is that they take something that's working incredibly well in the US, some kind of unique, innovative product, and then they just do it in Australia, or they do it in Germany, they do it in Sweden. And then it already has product market fit. People know it works. You just copy, paste, translate it here, and off you go. The issue is when you ultimately hit the TAM of Australia, which happens pretty quickly, particularly if you have a nice winning product that can scale quite fast. And then you go, okay, now we have to go into the US and compete with the people that we copied our idea off. And when that happens, you often see a suppression in performance because there's a market leader there and you're coming in as a competitor with a kind of a clone product and you begin to fail. And so that's another example of SKU prioritization and not translating winning products effectively enough to a new market. Outside of these three and just not having good enough ads, this is really where these are the main issues that end up happening when you do a US launch. So my recommendation is to, number one, make sure that your ads are actually good before you go and scale them into another region. The reality is that a really high-performing ad will scale into every other region effectively. And it's because I've seen it time and time again. If you have a good enough ad that is really scalable on top of funnel audiences and converts them, you can go and run that thing worldwide, and it works like almost everywhere. The thing is, you probably don't have an ad right now that is that good. So firstly, I'd be watching all of our content on how to actually make good ads. Secondly, I would be then testing all of your ads through Q1 because it's the best testing period possible that mimics a launch into another market. Then I would be looking at CRO. Make sure that your landing pages and your website experience match the region. Make sure that all the small things are actually in place. Okay, it's 1,000 golden BBs, not one silver bullet. So are your abandoned cart flows in place? Your returns policies and things like that in place? It's going to have minor impacts on total performance. And then number three, what products are you actually translating into this market? What's your SKU prioritization, and how do your size curves look? Because they end up being very common issues as well that end up negatively impacting performance.